No warning, no gasp. Just the sharp crack of crystal hitting marble, and then silence so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. Elizabeth Cole's hand froze halfway to her glass. Around her, 20 people in tailored suits and evening gowns turned to stone. The older woman in the jade hanbok lay crumpled near the table's edge, one arm twisted beneath her, lips already losing color. Elizabeth moved before her brain caught up. She shoved past a man with a gun poorly concealed under his jacket and dropped to her knees beside the woman. Her fingers found the carotid, nothing. She tilted the woman's head back, checked the airway, and locked her hands over the sternum. "Call an ambulance," she said without looking up. No one moved. She started compressions. Hard, fast, 30 beats. The woman's ribs flexed under her palms. Elizabeth bent low, gave 2 breaths, watched the chest rise and fall, then back to compressions. The room stayed silent except for the rhythm of her hands and the soul. Faint hum of the city below the rooftop. That was when she felt it. The weight of someone watching. Not panic, not curiosity, something sharper. Before we continue, if you want more stories told this way, like the video, share it and subscribe. Now let's dive in. She didn't look up, couldn't afford to, but her peripheral vision caught him. A man standing 3 feet away, arms loose at his sides, face unreadable. Ink crawled up his neck and disappeared under his collar. His suit fit too well for someone who worked with his hands, but his knuckles told a different story. He wasn't watching the woman on the floor. He was watching Elizabeth. The woman's chest hitched. A shallow breath, then another. Elizabeth rolled her onto her side, checked her pulse again, and sat back on her heels. Relief rippled through the crowd, but the tattooed man's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked more tense. Sirens wailed in the distance. Security finally moved, clearing a path to the elevator. Paramedics arrived in under 3 minutes, efficient and silent. They loaded the woman onto a stretcher without asking questions. Elizabeth stood, wiped her hands on her dress, and tried to fade into the background. The tattooed man stepped into her path. "You saved her life," he said. His voice was low, controlled, with an accent that sat somewhere between soul and somewhere else entirely. Elizabeth met his eyes, dark, unblinking. "She had a pulse when they left. That's all I know." He didn't smile, didn't thank her again, just reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. Matte black. No name, no title, just a phone number embossed in silver. "You'll be contacted," he said. Not a request, a statement. Elizabeth took the card because refusing felt more dangerous than complying. He turned and followed the paramedics into the elevator. The doors closed. The crowd exhaled. She looked down at the card in her hand and felt the weight of something she couldn't name yet. 3 days later, Elizabeth stood outside a private hospital floor that didn't exist on any directory. The elevator had required a keycard. The hallway had no signs, just 2 men in dark suits who nodded when she gave her name. The woman from New Year's Eve was sitting up in bed, ivy in her arm, color back in her face. Madame Hahn, the nurse had called her. She smiled when Elizabeth entered, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Dr. Cole," she said. Her English was flawless. "Please, sit." Elizabeth stayed standing. "I'm not a doctor, I'm a researcher." "Semantics," Madame Hahn gestured to the chair. "You helped me. I wanted to thank you properly." Elizabeth sat. The room was too quiet, too controlled. She'd worked in enough high-security wards to recognize the signs. This wasn't a hospital. This was a fortress. "You didn't need to bring me here for that," Elizabeth said carefully. Madame Hahn's smile sharpened. "No, but I wanted to meet the woman who once saved my son's life." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. She kept her face neutral. "I think you have me confused with someone else." "London, 4 years ago, a private clinic in Kensington. You treated a young man with advanced lymphoma. No records, no insurance, cash payment." Madame Hahn leaned forward slightly. "You told no one, not even your colleagues." Elizabeth's pulse hammered in her ears, but she didn't flinch. "I treat a lot of patients." "Not like him." The door opened. The tattooed man from the rooftop stepped inside. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. He didn't look at his mother. His eyes locked on Elizabeth. Madame Hahn's voice softened. "My son doesn't make mistakes. If he brought you here, it's because he trusts you." Elizabeth stood. "I didn't agree to anything." The man finally spoke. "You saved her life. In my world, that creates a debt. I don't want your debt. That's not how debts work." Silence stretched between them. Madame Hahn watched with the faint amusement of someone who'd seen this play out before. Elizabeth turned to leave, His voice stopped her at the door. "If my mother learns the truth," he said quietly, "people die." She didn't turn around, didn't ask what truth. She already knew. The lymphoma, the relapse, the prognosis she'd given him 4 years ago in a language designed to soften the unsoftenable. 6 months, maybe less. She walked out without another word, but the card in her pocket felt heavier than it had 3 days ago. The phone call came at 2 in the morning. Elizabeth stared at the unknown number glowing on her screen, already knowing who it was. She let it ring 4 times before answering. "Tomorrow, noon, same hospital." The line went dead. She didn't go back to sleep. The elevator ride up felt longer this time. The same 2 men in suits, the same silent hallway. But when the doors to Madame Han's room opened, the woman was gone. In her place sat the tattooed man, alone in a chair positioned to face the door. Han Tae-rin. She'd looked him up, found almost nothing. A few mentions in financial journals about import-export businesses, a blurry photo from a charity gala 5 years ago, the kind of invisibility that required money and power in equal measure. "She's been discharged," he said before Elizabeth could ask. "Then why am I here?" He stood, buttoned his suit jacket. "Walk with me." It wasn't a question. They moved through corridors Elizabeth hadn't seen before. Private wings, locked doors with biometric scanners. He didn't explain where they were going, and she didn't ask. Finally, he stopped outside a room with frosted glass. "I need you to understand something," he said. 4 years ago, you gave me a timeline. You were wrong." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "Lymphoma remission rates for your stage were—" "I'm not in remission." The air left her lungs. He pushed open the door. Inside was a medical suite that looked like it belonged in a research hospital, not a private facility. Imaging equipment, centrifuges, a treatment chair with IV stands. "I bought myself time," he continued. "Experimental treatments, drugs that don't exist in official channels. I've had 3 years beyond your 6 months." Elizabeth walked to the imaging screen on the wall. Scans were clipped to a light board. She didn't need to be an oncologist to read the shadows spreading through his lymphatic system like spilled ink as sink. "How long?" she asked. "That's what I need you to tell." "Me," she turned. "I'm a cardiology researcher. You need an oncologist." "I have 5 oncologists. They all say the same thing, 12 to 18 months, maybe less." His voice didn't waver. "I need someone who doesn't treat me like a terminal case, someone who treated me like a patient when I was nobody." "You were never nobody." "To you, I was." Elizabeth studied him. The tattoos that disappeared under his collar, the stillness in his posture that came from years of calculated violence. She'd seen men like him before. Her father had been surrounded by them in Lagos before the family moved to London. Different continent, same language of power. "Your mother doesn't know," she said. "No." "And if she finds out?" His expression hardened. "She's already lost 2 sons, one to a rival family, one to prison in Ghana. If she learns I'm dying, she'll try to secure succession violently. People who've served us for decades will be purged. Alliances will collapse. Blood will follow." Elizabeth crossed her arms. "That's not a medical problem." "No, it's a time problem. I need to transition power before my body fails. But I can't do that if I don't know how much time I have left." He moved closer, not threatening, just close enough that she could see the exhaustion beneath the control. "You don't owe me anything, but I'm asking." She looked at the scans again, at the treatment chair, at the man who'd somehow survived 3 years longer than science said he should. "I'll need access to everything," she said finally. "Full medical history, treatment logs, genetic panels." "Done. And I work alone, no handlers, no security watching over my shoulder." He nodded once. "One more thing," Elizabeth said. "If I do this, you don't get to hide from the answers. Whatever I find, you hear it. No filters." "Agreed." She extended her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm, warm, alive, for now. 2 weeks later, Elizabeth sat in a private gym converted into a makeshift clinic. The wounded man on the table had a bullet graze across his ribs. Shallow, painful, not fatal. Tae-rin stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Korean. His tone never rose, but the man on the other end was clearly agitated. He ended the call and pocketed the phone. "Trouble?" Elizabeth asked, threading the suture. "Always." She tied off the stitch. The injured man didn't flinch. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he kept his breathing steady. These weren't civilians playing at crime. They were professionals. Guns rested on a nearby bench. Disassembled, cleaned, ready. "You run this from Seoul?" she asked. "Seoul. Accra, Lagos, London. We move where the work is. We? Afro-Korean networks. My father was Nigerian. My mother's family has been in Seoul for 3 generations. We exist in the gaps. He glanced at her. You understand gaps? She did. Born in Lagos, raised in London, Nigerian name, British passport, research career that never quite fit the mold. Your work, she said carefully. Does it require this much violence? No, but it invites it. He watched her finish the bandaging. Does that bother you? Elizabeth packed her supplies. I've worked in trauma wards in Manchester and emergency rooms in Accra. Violence bothers me, but I stopped being surprised by it a long time ago. The wounded man left without a word. Taerin stayed. The results came back, he said quietly. Elizabeth closed her medical bag. 8 months, maybe 10 if the current treatment holds. He absorbed this without reaction, just a small nod. Your mother will notice eventually, Elizabeth said. I know. What then? He looked out at the city lights bleeding through the windows. Then I stopped pretending I can control everything. The mountain temple smelled of incense and old wood. Elizabeth hadn't expected to be here. The text had come 3 days after the prognosis, just coordinates and a time. She arrived in a car with tinted windows, driven by a man who hadn't spoken once during the 2-hour trip from Seoul. The temple sat on a ridge overlooking terraced hills, mist clinging to the valleys below. It looked abandoned until she noticed the vehicles parked behind a grove of pines. Expensive. Foreign plates. Taerin waited at the entrance, dressed in black, no tie. The ink on his collarbone was visible above his shirt collar. Dates in Roman numerals. Names in Hangul. You shouldn't be here, he said. You sent me coordinates. As a courtesy, so you'd know where I was. He glanced past her at the temple courtyard. This isn't your world. Then explain it to me. He studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the main hall. Neutral ground. Old rules. When territory disputes can't be settled. Through channels we meet here. No weapons. No violence on sacred ground. Sounds civilized. It's theater. Real decisions get made after. They entered together. The hall was dim, lit by paper lanterns that cast shifting shadows on wooden beams. 5 men sat in a loose circle on cushions. They stopped talking when Elizabeth appeared. Eyes tracked her movement, calculated, cold. One man stood, older than the others, silver threaded through his hair. He spoke in Korean, sharp and dismissive. Taerin responded in the same language, calm but firm. The exchange went back and forth. Voices didn't rise, but tension coiled tighter with each sentence. Elizabeth caught fragments, words she'd learned from research assistants and hospital staff: transition, authority, weakness. The silver-haired man switched to English. For her benefit or as a power move, she couldn't tell. You bring outsiders now? He looked at Elizabeth. A woman who doesn't belong. She's a doctor, Taerin said. You're sick. Not a question. A statement laced with satisfaction. Taerin's expression didn't change. Everyone gets sick. Sick men don't lead. They become liabilities. The man stepped closer. Your mother built this network on strength. You maintained it through fear, but fear requires presence, authority. What happens when you're too weak to enforce either? Elizabeth felt the shift before she understood it. This wasn't negotiation, it was a challenge. Public, calculated, designed to strip Taerin of credibility in front of people whose loyalty hinged on perception. Step aside now, the man continued. Transfer your holdings to someone capable. We'll honor your family's legacy, or what? Elizabeth's voice cut through the hall. Every head turned. Taerin's eyes snapped to her, warning clear. She ignored it. You're proposing what exactly? She asked the silver-haired man. A hostile takeover disguised as concern? How does that honor anything? The man's smile was thin. You misunderstand the situation. No, you do. Elizabeth took a step forward. Transition isn't weakness. It's strategy. Holding power until you collapse isn't strength. It's ego. If he transfers authority while he's still capable of making rational decisions, he controls the narrative. He chooses successors. He maintains influence without the burden of daily operations. Silence filled the hall. The silver-haired man's expression hardened. You presume to understand our world. I understand succession crises. I've watched men cling to power until it destroyed them and everyone around them, seen organizations fracture because pride outweighed pragmatism. She looked at Taerin. If he's smart, he's already planning transition. Shared authority, distributed leadership, makes the network resilient instead of fragile. One of the seated men spoke, younger, tattoos visible on his hands. She's not wrong. The silver-haired man rounded on him. You'd take advice from someone who's been here 5 minutes? I'd take advice that makes sense. Another voice joined in, then another. The conversation shifted. Elizabeth stepped back, pulse hammering. Tayrin's face was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. The meeting dissolved into smaller arguments. Strategic debates, no resolution, but the immediate threat had diffused. The silver-haired man left first, brushing past Elizabeth without acknowledgement. Tayrin waited until the hall emptied before speaking. That was reckless. It worked. This time. He moved toward the door. You just made yourself visible. That has consequences. What kind? He didn't answer, just walked out into the fading daylight. The retaliation came 48 hours later. Elizabeth was in her apartment when her phone rang. Tayrin's voice was controlled, but she heard the edge beneath it. They took Minjun. Who? My mother's head of security, the man you treated in the gym. He paused. They left a message, said they want to discuss terms for his return. Elizabeth's stomach turned. Terms. My resignation? Public, immediate. That's not a negotiation. That's humiliation. Yes. She heard engine noise in the background. Voices. Where are you? Heading to the exchange point. I'm calling because you need to leave Seoul tonight. They saw you at the temple. They know you're involved. Elizabeth grabbed her jacket. Where's the exchange? Elizabeth. Where? A long silence. Then he gave her an address. She was out the door before he could argue. The warehouse district was industrial, empty. Shipping containers stacked like building blocks against the night sky. Tayrin's car was parked under a broken streetlight. He stood beside it, alone, hands in his pockets. Elizabeth approached. Where are they? Inside, waiting. You can't go in there alone. I'm not alone. I have 20 men positioned around the perimeter. He looked at her. You shouldn't be here. Neither should Minjun. A phone buzzed. Tayrin answered, listened, then ended the call. They're ready. Elizabeth's mind raced. This was wrong. The setup, the isolation, the false choice. Don't trade yourself for him, she said. He's loyal. That's worth something. Not your life. Tayrin smiled faintly. You're assuming I plan to trade anything. Elizabeth followed him toward the warehouse entrance. Metal doors hung crooked on rusted hinges. Light leaked through gaps in the corrugated walls. Stay behind me, Tayrin said. She didn't. Inside, the space opened into a cavern of concrete and shadow. Overhead lights dangled from chains, some flickering, most dead. Minjun knelt in the center, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood dried under his nose. 3 men surrounded him. The silver-haired man from the temple stood off to the side, watching. You came, he said, not surprised, satisfied. Tayrin's voice was flat. Let him go. First, we talk terms. There are no terms. Release him, and this ends quietly. The silver-haired man laughed. You think you're negotiating from strength? You're dying. Your network's fragmenting. Your mother doesn't even know you're sick. He gestured at Minjun. This is just the beginning. Every person loyal to you becomes leverage until you step aside. Elizabeth moved forward before Tayrin could respond. She kept her hands visible, her voice steady. You want transition, she said. He's offering it. But you want capitulation. There's a difference. The silver-haired man's eyes narrowed. You again? Hear me out. You take control through force. You inherit enemies. His mother's enemies. Every alliance built on respect collapses into resentment. You'll spend years rebuilding what you destroy tonight. She looked at Minjun, then back. But if he transitions voluntarily, publicly endorses shared leadership, you gain legitimacy. His network becomes yours without the bloodshed. Why would I believe he'd honor that? Because he's smart enough to know losing gracefully keeps him alive longer than fighting a war he can't win. Tayrin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silver-haired man studied her. You speak for him now? I speak for survival, his and yours. Elizabeth stepped closer to Minjun. Holding him accomplishes nothing except proving you're willing to break old rules. That makes you dangerous, not credible. Dangerous men don't build empires. They inherit rubble. One of the men guarding Minjun shifted uncomfortably. The silver-haired man noticed. Power wasn't just force, it was consensus, and consensus was cracking. Release him, Elizabeth said quietly. Accept the transition framework. Negotiate terms like businessmen instead of thugs. A long pause. The warehouse creaked in the wind. The silver-haired man nodded once. Cut him loose. The zip ties snapped. Minjun stood slowly, favoring his left side. Taerin moved to support him, but Minjun waved him off, pride. Even now. 1 week, the silver-haired man said to Taerin. You present a formal succession plan. If I don't like it, we revisit this conversation. Without her. He looked at Elizabeth. You've bought time. Don't waste it. They left through different exits. Protocol? Taerin's men materialized from the shadows, surrounding them as they reached the cars. Minjun climbed into the back seat without assistance. Elizabeth got in beside him. Taerin drove in silence. The city lights blurred past. No one spoke until they reached the private medical facility. Inside the treatment room, Elizabeth cleaned Minjun's face with antiseptic. His cheekbone was bruised but not broken, ribs possibly cracked. He winced when she pressed his left side. You didn't have to do that, Minjun said in accented English. Yes, I did. Taerin stood by the window, arms crossed. You shouldn't have been there at all. Elizabeth applied butterfly bandages. You're welcome. I'm serious. You inserted yourself into something that could have what? Gotten me killed? You were about to trade your entire future for one man. That's not leadership. That's suicide with extra steps. He's been with my family for 15 years. And he'll be dead in 15 hours if you keep making decisions like that. She finished the bandaging and turned to face him. You don't get to be noble anymore. You don't have time for it. Taerin's expression cracked. Just for a second, exhaustion bled through the cracks. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. Do what? Let go. Elizabeth wiped her hands on a towel. Minjun excused himself, limping toward the door. When it closed, the silence felt heavier. My father died in a Lagos hospital, Taerin said. Infection from a simple wound. He refused treatment because he didn't trust doctors. My mother watched him deteriorate for weeks. By the time she forced him into surgery, it was too late. He looked at his hands. I told myself I'd never be that stubborn, that I'd face reality head on. You have been. No, I've been buying time, postponing, pretending 8 months is enough to fix 20 years of structure built around one person. Elizabeth leaned against the table. Then stop pretending. Build the transition now. Not because you're weak, because you're practical. And if it fails, then it fails honestly. Better than dying with your hands still gripping something that's already slipping away. He crossed the room slowly, stood close enough that she could see the fine scars on his knuckles. Old wounds layered over older ones. 4 years ago, you told me I had 6 months, he said. I hated you for it. Hated the certainty in your voice. The clinical detachment. I was trying to help. I know. And I didn't want help. I wanted rage. Something to fight against. His voice dropped. But you were right. And I wasted months being angry instead of adapting. Elizabeth met his eyes. You're not wasting time now. Aren't I? No. You're choosing how to spend what's left. That's different. Something shifted between them. Not attraction, not yet. Just recognition. Two people who understood that control was an illusion and the only real choice was how you let go. The succession plan, Taerin said. I'll need help writing it. I'm a researcher, not a lawyer. I don't need a lawyer. I need someone who sees clearly. He paused. Someone who tells me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Elizabeth considered this. The risk, the entanglement, the way her life had already tilted toward his orbit. 1 week, she said finally. 1 week. They worked through the night in a penthouse office Elizabeth hadn't known existed. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul, the city stretched out like circuitry beneath them. Taerin spread documents across a glass table, corporate structures, holdings in 12 countries, names she didn't recognize but could tell carried weight by how carefully he spoke them. This sector handles logistics, he said, pointing. Shipping routes between West Africa and East Asia. My mother built it from nothing. It's legitimate now, but the foundations weren't. Elizabeth scanned the organizational chart. Who inherits it? That's the problem. Split it 3 ways and it weakens. Give it to one person and the others revolt. Then don't split by division. Split by function. One person oversees operations, another handles finance, a third manages external relations. Shared authority with clear lanes. He made notes. His handwriting was precise, controlled. They'll see it as dilution. They'll see it as insurance. No single point of failure. She leaned back. Your mother survived 2 sons dying because she distributed power among people she trusted. You're doing the same thing. Tayrin set down his pen, rubbed his eyes. The exhaustion was visible now, carved into the lines around his mouth. When did you know? Elizabeth asked. Know what? That it had come back. He was quiet for a long moment. 18 months ago, fatigue I couldn't explain. Night sweats, I told myself it was stress. By the time I admitted the truth, the scans looked like the ones you saw. Why didn't you start aggressive treatment immediately? Because aggressive treatment meant stepping back, delegating, admitting weakness. He looked at her. In my world, weakness is contagious. People smell it and they scatter. I couldn't afford that. And now? Now I don't have a choice. Elizabeth's phone buzzed. A message from the hospital in London. Another research position offer. Good. Salary. Stable. Safe. She dismissed it without reading the full details. You should take that, Tayrin said, watching her. You read my messages now? I see your face when you get them. You want out. She didn't deny it. I came to Seoul for a 6-month research fellowship. That was 8 months ago. I've treated gunshot wounds in private gyms and negotiated hostage releases in warehouses. This isn't what I signed up for. So leave. I will, after the transition. Why wait? Elizabeth considered the question. The honest answer sat uncomfortable in her chest. Because I want to see if you actually do it. Let go. Most people can't. Most people don't have 8 months to practice. Dawn broke gradually, turning the sky from black to gray to pale gold. Tayrin finalized the succession document just as the city began to wake. He signed it, dated it, slid it across the table. Read it, he said. Tell me if I missed anything. Elizabeth scanned the pages. Legal language, wrapped around careful power transfers, timelines, contingencies. It was thorough, almost clinical. One thing, she said. What? Your mother. She's not mentioned. She's retired. Officially. But you're transferring her life's work to people she didn't choose. She'll fight this. Tayrin's expression hardened. She'll accept it. Will she? He stood, walked to the window. The sun caught the ink on his collarbone. Elizabeth could make out some of the names now. His brothers, his father, dates that marked endings. I told her yesterday, he said quietly. About the cancer, the prognosis, everything. Elizabeth's breath caught. And? She didn't cry, didn't rage, just asked how much time. He pressed his palm against the glass. Then she said she'd already lost too many sons to pride. She wouldn't lose another to it. That's why you're doing this? Partly, he turned. But also because you were right. Holding on until I collapse doesn't protect anyone. It just guarantees chaos. Elizabeth joined him at the window. Below, traffic began to thicken, people starting their days with no idea what happened in rooms like this, what decisions shaped the invisible structures that governed their lives. I ruled by fear because it was faster, Tayrin said. Simpler. Fear doesn't require trust or consensus, just power. But fear dies with the person wielding it. There's no succession plan for fear. What replaces it? I don't know yet. Something slower, something that outlasts me. Elizabeth looked at him, at the man who'd survived 3 years past his expiration date through sheer will and experimental medicine, who was now choosing to dismantle everything he'd built because he understood time better than most people ever would. 8 months, she said. Maybe 10. What will you do with them? He smiled faintly. Teach people how to run an empire without me. Watch my mother finally rest. Maybe take a vacation, he paused. What will you do? Elizabeth thought about London, about research labs and academic conferences and a life that made sense on paper. Then she thought about this, standing in a Seoul penthouse at dawn next to a dying crime lord who'd accidentally become something like a friend. I'll stay, she said. For now. Why? Because you're right. I want to see what comes after the fear. The sun climbed higher, the city woke fully. Somewhere below, the succession plan would begin moving through channels, meetings would be called, power would shift. And for the first time in years, Han Tae-rin looked at the future not as something to control, but as something to prepare for. Elizabeth watched him breathe, steady, present, alive. For now, that was enough. If this story stayed with you, like the video, share it with someone, and subscribe for more stories like this.